Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, February 17, 1864. 8:45 in the evening. 8 men sat shoulder to shoulder inside an iron tube 40 feet long and barely 4 feet wide. There was no light, no engine, no heat. The only sound was the grinding of a hand-cranked propeller shaft and the quiet breathing of men who understood they might never come back up. Their commander was Lieutenant George Dixon, 26 years old. In front of his submarine, attached to a 16-foot iron pole, was a copper keg packed with 90 pounds of black powder. In his pocket, pressed against his hip, was a gold coin. That coin had already saved his life once. What happened on this night would change naval warfare forever. And what happened to these 8 men afterward would remain one of the deepest mysteries in American military history for the next 131 years. This is the story of the H.L. Hunley. To understand why the Confederacy built a hand-cranked submarine in 1863, you need to understand what was happening to Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston was the largest port in the South, the symbolic heart of the Confederacy. It was the harbor where Confederate guns had fired the opening shots of the Civil War on April 12, 1861, bombarding the Union garrison at Fort Sumter. By 1862, the United States Navy had established a blockade of the entire southern coastline. The strategy had a name, the Anaconda Plan: strangle the South economically, cut off imports, cut off exports, make it impossible for the Confederacy to buy weapons, to sell its cotton, to feed its armies. By 1863, the people of Charleston were running out of food, out of medicine, out of hope. Blockade runners, fast ships trying to slip through the Union fleet at night, were being captured one by one. They needed something the world had never seen: a weapon that could attack from beneath the surface. The submarine was built in Mobile, Alabama, in the spring of 1863, by a lawyer named Horace Lawson Hunley and 2 engineers named James McClintock and Baxter Watson. It was constructed from the boiler of a steam locomotive, a cylindrical iron shell 40 feet long, barely 4 feet in diameter. 8 men sat in a row cranking a propeller shaft by hand. Ballast tanks could be flooded to push the vessel below the surface, then pumped dry to bring it back up. 2 small conning towers gave the commander a way to sea. No engine, no electricity, just iron, muscle, and determination. In July 1863, the submarine was demonstrated in Mobile Bay. A coal barge was towed to the middle of the harbor as a target. The submarine approached submerged, dragged a contact mine beneath the barge, and detonated it. The barge sank. Confederate Admiral Franklin Buchanan was convinced immediately. The submarine was loaded onto a railroad flat car and shipped to Charleston, South Carolina, arriving on August 12, 1863. 13 days later, it killed 5 men. The first crew in Charleston was led by Lieutenant John Payne, a Confederate Navy officer with no submarine experience whatsoever. After only 5 days of training, on August 29, 1863, Payne accidentally engaged the diving planes while the forward hatch was open. The bow dipped below the surface. Water flooded in. Payne and 2 men near the hatches escaped. The 5 remaining crew members drowned. Confederate divers found the submarine on the harbor bottom, bow angled downward. They raised it and prepared to try again. The second crew included Horace Hunley himself, the lawyer who had funded the project. He wanted to prove it could be done safely. On October 15, 1863, with Hunley personally commanding, the submarine made practice dives near the Confederate receiving ship CSS Indian Chief in the Cooper River. It dove beneath the anchored vessel. It never came back up. When divers found the wreck, they saw a scene that would haunt everyone who heard about it. Hunley was found at the forward hatch, which he had been trying to open. The other men were at their stations. Several had lit candles in the darkness. The burned stubs were still there. The forward ballast tank had been left open, flooding the bow too fast for anyone to react. 8 men dead, including the man whose name the submarine now carried. Confederate soldiers gave the vessel a new name: the peripatetic coffin, the swimming coffin, the murderous machine. General Beauregard ordered the project abandoned. But one man refused to accept that. George Dixon had been working as a steamboat engineer on the Mississippi River when the war began in 1861. He was in Mobile, Alabama when the fighting started, and he enlisted in the Confederate Army as a member of Company A, 21st Alabama Infantry. In April 1862, his regiment fought at the Battle of Shiloh in southwestern Tennessee. At that moment, the bloodiest battle in American history. 23,000 men were killed, wounded, or captured in 2 days. Dixon was shot in the left thigh. The bullet should have shattered his femur. It should have cost him the leg or his life. Instead, it hit a gold coin. Before leaving for the war, Dixon had been given a $20 gold piece, a Liberty Head coin minted in 1860 by a young woman named Queenie Bennett of Mobile. She asked him to keep it always. A good luck charm. A promise. On April 6, 1862, at Shiloh, a bullet struck that coin directly in the center. The coin bent inward, absorbing the impact, slowing the bullet before it reached the bone. Dixon's femur was damaged. He limped for the rest of his life, but he kept the leg. He kept the coin. Later he had it engraved on the back. Shiloh, April 6, 1862. My life preserver, GED. While recovering in Mobile, Dixon encountered the submarine being built at the Park and Lyons machine shop. He became fascinated. He believed the vessel could work, if operated correctly, with proper training and a commander who understood what he was doing. When Beauregard was ready to abandon the project after the second sinking, Dixon went to him personally and argued for one more attempt. Beauregard agreed, on one condition. Dixon had to find his own crew. No one would be ordered into that vessel. Volunteers only. Dixon asked for volunteers, knowing that 13 men had already died inside the same iron hull. Men stepped forward anyway. Dixon spent the autumn and winter of 1863 training his crew of 7 volunteers with an intensity that had no precedent in history, because there was no precedent. No training manual, no experienced instructors, no previous crew to learn from. They ran practice missions in Charleston Harbor almost every single night. They practiced submerging and surfacing. They measured how long the air inside the sealed vessel would last. The answer was approximately 2 hours. They drilled until the cranking became instinct, until every man knew every emergency procedure, until Dixon was confident they were as ready as human beings could be. He wrote to a friend in Mobile in January 1864 that catching the Atlantic Ocean smooth during winter months was, he said, considerable of an undertaking and one that I never wish to undertake again. They waited for the weather. 4 miles offshore, the USS Housatonic rode at anchor, a 16-gun sloop of war, 177 feet long, with a crew of 160 men. She had been blockading Charleston since September 1862. Her captain, Commander John Pickering, had received warnings about Confederate submarine activity. He had ordered his crew to watch for unusual shapes in the water and told them that if they saw something approaching, they should start the engines and move the ship. On the evening of February 17, 1864, the sea was finally calm enough. At approximately 8 o'clock, Dixon ordered his crew to begin cranking. The Hunley left its berth at Breach Inlet on the northern end of Sullivan's Island and moved northeast into the open Atlantic. They traveled primarily on the surface to preserve the air supply, with only the 2 conning towers visible above the waterline. The distance to the Housatonic was 4 miles. At maximum speed, the journey took roughly 45 minutes. At 8:45, lookouts on the Housatonic spotted something in the water off the port bow. A dark shape moving just below the surface. Executive Officer Lieutenant Higginson immediately ordered battle stations. The anchor chains were let out to swing the ship away. The engines were ordered started. Sailors opened fire with rifles and pistols into the water. It was too late. The Hunley drove the 16-foot iron spar directly into the Housatonic's wooden hull, 4 feet below the waterline, just forward of the mizzen mast. 90 pounds of black powder exploded against the hull. An enormous column of water erupted from the surface. The stern of the Housatonic rose partially out of the water, then dropped. She settled to the bottom, stern first, within 5 minutes. The water was only 30 feet deep, and most of the crew survived by climbing the rigging and deploying lifeboats. 5 sailors died. The H.L. Hunley had just made history. She was the first submarine in the history of warfare to sink an enemy warship in combat. And then she disappeared. Confederate soldiers on shore at Battery Marshall on Sullivan's Island reported seeing a blue signal light approximately 15 minutes after the explosion. The agreed signal, meaning the mission had succeeded. They lit the bonfire they had prepared to guide the Hunley home. The Hunley never came. Searches were conducted in the days and weeks that followed. Divers went down around the Housatonic wreck. Confederate ships patrolled the harbor. Lieutenant William Alexander, Dixon's executive officer who had been pulled from the mission at the last moment, a decision that had saved his life, spent weeks trying to find out what had happened to his commander and his crew. Nothing. The war continued. Richmond fell. Lee surrendered. The Confederacy ceased to exist. The H.L. Hunley and her crew lay somewhere on the floor of Charleston Harbor, their fate unknown for 131 years. In the 1980s, novelist Clive Cussler, author of the Dirk Pitt adventure series, became obsessed with finding the Hunley. He founded a private search organization called NUMA, the National Underwater and Marine Agency, named after the fictional government agency in his books. For 14 years, NUMA conducted systematic search operations in Charleston Harbor using side-scan sonar and hundreds of dives, methodically eliminating areas and narrowing down the search. In May 1995, a NUMA dive team found an anomalous shape in the sandy bottom 4 miles offshore in 30 feet of water. Diver Ralph Wilbanks reached down through the silt and felt iron. He brushed away sediment with his hands and uncovered a ventilator fitting that matched exactly the original design sketches made by William Alexander after the war. They had found her. On August 8, 2000, a crane barge lifted the H.L. Hunley from the seafloor. At 8:37 in the morning, she broke the surface for the first time in 136 years. A crowd of spectators on surrounding boats erupted in cheers. The submarine was transported to the Warren Lash Conservation Center in North Charleston, a facility built specifically to house and preserve it. Then the archaeologists opened it. The crew was still inside, all 8 of them, still at their stations. Their bones were preserved in the silt that had filled the vessel over more than a century. They had not tried to escape. This was the crucial observation. If the men had died slowly from suffocation as the air ran out, they would have shown signs of moving toward the hatches, of trying to get out. Instead, they were sitting at their posts. Their postures suggested sudden death, not gradual. The hatches were closed. The hull showed no obvious structural damage. The cause of death was a complete mystery. In 2001, senior archaeologist Maria Jacobson was working through a mound of sediment around the remains of the crew member believed to be Dixon. She was kneeling inside the forward compartment, carefully sifting through silt when she felt something. She withdrew her hand. She was holding a gold coin, a Liberty Head $20 gold piece minted in 1860, bent deeply inward from a powerful impact. On the reverse, engraved in careful cursive, Shiloh, April 6, 1862. My life preserver. GED. Jacobson looked at her colleagues and said simply, "I've got the coin." For 137 years, people had told the story of the lucky coin that saved a man at Shiloh. For 137 years, no one had known for certain whether it was fact or legend. Now they knew. The coin had saved him at Shiloh. It had kept him alive long enough to find the Hunley, long enough to train a crew of 8 men to operate a machine that had already killed 13, long enough to wait through a winter of storms, long enough to crank 4 miles through dark water and make history. But it could not save him from what came next. In 2017, biomedical engineer Rachel Lance at Duke University published the answer to the final mystery, what had killed the crew, in the scientific journal PLOS One. Lance had spent 3 years building scale models of the Hunley and testing the effects of explosive blasts at close range. Working with an ATF explosives expert and doing the mathematics of blast physics applied to human physiology, she reached a conclusion that was both elegant and devastating. The crew was killed by the blast from their own weapon. The torpedo was not a self-propelled bomb. It was a keg of gunpowder on the end of a 16-foot pole. When it detonated against the Housatonic's hull, the furthest any crew member was from the explosion was approximately 42 feet. In air, that distance might have been survivable, but water transmits blast pressure waves 4 times more efficiently than air and sustains them far longer. Lance calculated that the crew's lungs were subjected to 60 milliseconds of sustained blast overpressure, enough to tear apart the delicate structures where blood vessels meet airways, filling the lungs with blood in seconds. They died sitting at their stations, instantly, having just successfully completed the mission that history would remember them for. The probability of immediately fatal lung trauma for each crew member, at minimum 85%. On April 17, 2004, the crew of the H.L. Hunley was buried with full military honors in Charleston, South Carolina, at Magnolia Cemetery. More than 10,000 people lined the streets to watch the horse-drawn caisson carry the 8 men to their rest. Descendants of Confederate and Union veterans stood side by side, 140 years after they had climbed into an iron tube and paddled out into the dark Atlantic. They finally came home. The H.L. Hunley changed warfare. The concept she demonstrated, an armed vessel attacking from beneath the surface, became the foundation for the submarine warfare that shaped both world wars. The German U-boats that nearly starved Britain in 1917 and 1942 were the theoretical descendants of 8 men cranking a hand-powered iron tube through Charleston Harbor in 1864. But what this story is really about is something simpler. A man carried a coin that saved his life at Shiloh. He carried it to a machine that had already killed 13 men. He talked his way into commanding it. And on that night, he changed history. The H.L. Hunley is on display today at the Warren Lash Conservation Center in North Charleston, South Carolina. She is the only combat submarine in history that you can stand next to and understand, with complete clarity, exactly what it cost to crew her. 40 feet of iron, 8 men, a hand crank, 90 pounds of gunpowder at the end of a stick, and a bent gold coin that lies beside its owner still.